This then is a quick update on all things concerning pensioners, of whom I'm now one of them. Okay, today I just want to focus quickly on our new Chancellor of the Exchequer, a certain lady called Rachel Reeves. And I just want to go through how she has been deliberately targeting the pensioners in particular, as advised by her advisor, ex-head of the Inland Revenue, HMRC Services, Sir Edward Troop, or Sir Edward Trout, however you want to pronounce it. Anyway, cutting to the point, he is the chappie who's responsible for advising Rachel Reeves that we pensioners today are the golden generation on Comfy Street, and we're sat back lording it over everybody else while they all struggle to pay their bills. That is the story as alleged by Sir Edward Troop Trout to Rachel Reeves, and it looks like she swallowed that story hook, line and sinker, when the reality is that the only pensioners who are being referred to as on Easy Street would be those who were working for the government or local council offices, teachers, policemen perhaps, and firemen, who have got access to these golden pensions that the rest of us who'd actually worked in the real world, the real hard-hitting commercial world, where there's no place to hide, you have to perform every day, as I had to do in my 35, 40 years career in marketing and sales. It was perform every day, every year, or you were out. That was the constant pressure that I was under. I'm quite well off, but I never had access to these government pensions. And when you look into them, they are basically one of the reasons the pensions bill is so high, and I would argue they are unsustainable. But let's just look at Rachel Reeves. So, very clever lady, I think she's 40, a 2-1, and then she went on to do a master's degree in economics. So she's a very clever lady academically. But what we're going to do today, as we delve into some facts and figures, we'll do a little bit of number crunching, and we'll arrive at a certain point where I think we've got a lot of these politicians who are academically are brilliant, but for some strange reason, this intellect never seems to transfer itself into the real world in terms of making some truly brilliant common sense decisions for the benefit of everybody. So I'm going to be delving into that briefly with some number crunching. But anyway, as I say, just to summarise there, we pensioners today are the apparent golden generation, and Rachel Reeves was instructed we are the group that should be targeted. And what is happening is, more, you keep reading it daily in the media, more millions of pensioners now are being dragged into the tax bracket, and they're having to pay tax whereas they didn't pay before. Now, the point I'd like to make is this: these people, including myself, we're the ones who slogged it out for 35, 40 years, and we've worked our butts off, as I did, and we've been thrifty, many of us, and we've saved for our pensions. And the thanks we get for that, where we are actually trying to make ourselves less of a burden on the state, is we are the ones who will be specifically targeted. We are the ones who are being specifically targeted. And it doesn't end there. The situation is that many of the pensions now cumulatively are falling into the tax bracket, with the personal allowance remaining fixed at £12,500, and it's been like that for the past, so I think it was past 5-6 years, it hasn't changed. That means the amount of money we've been allowed to earn is falling into the tax bracket now, because what should have happened was every year the personal allowance of £12,500 before you pay tax, it should have increased at least in line with inflation. It hasn't. It's remained static, which is why millions of pensioners who are struggling those who are trying to work in addition to their pensions are now sucked into paying these taxes. Then I read a couple of days ago that Rachel Reeves isn't finished there, because next in line she's been advised to target pensioners even further by now imposing on those pensioners who've already worked for all their lives and saved for all their lives. It now looks like she's going to impose national insurance contributions on those pensioners working. The view being that I read, well, these pensioners benefit from the NHS and all the other benefits on offer, therefore they are the ones who should be paying into that system for those benefits they accrue. Completely missed off in that little analysis is the fact that, repeating myself, those are the pensioners that have already worked their butts off for 40 odd years and paid their way and didn't overextend themselves and acted in a responsible manner in the majority of instances, and they are the ones who are now going to be hammered even further. What this boils down to is this: the point I was going to make, the main theme, is that the one cutback that's going to hit many pensioners particularly hard is concerning the winter fuel payments, which averaged the normal payment was £300. I think in some instances, if you were really hard pressed, you were getting £600, but the norm was £300, which significantly helped those pensioners who were struggling to make ends meet. What is going to happen now is those £300 payments are being removed. It will be means tested, so only those who are really struggling will be the ones who will benefit. Those of you who have been thrifty in saving your money for a rainy day, i.e. when you retire, you're the ones who are now going to get hammered for being thrifty and being responsible and for not spending all your money throughout the years. You should have been throwing it away so that you could have thrown yourself at the mercy of the state. That is what is going to happen there. That is not a good situation, because it's now going to be winter fuel payments will be assessed, apparently, will be means tested, which means if you've got a reasonable amount of money without being one of the super wealthy pensioners, you're also going to be sucked into that tax net. And it just goes on and on and on with us being targeted. There seems to be no end to it. Heaven knows what's going to happen next. What happens here is, this is what's happened in terms of the government's budgets. By cancelling the fuel winter allowance for all pensioners, Rachel Reeves has saved the government, I think it's an estimated £1.5 billion. Now, I haven't been to Oxford University. I would say Rachel Reeves is supposed to be the creme de la creme in terms of intellect. That being the case, I'd like somebody to explain the following. £1.5 billion it costs to pay everybody, not means tested, all pensioners, the winter fuel allowance. Accordingly, why didn't Rachel Reeves look at other areas where she could have funded this £1.5 billion saving? Let me give you a few examples. Let's look at some of the budgets. The cost of asylum seekers in 2024, the budget is £4.3 billion. Do you see something? A story emerging there already? £4.3 billion for hundreds of thousands of asylum seekers literally flooding into this country over the channel. They deliberately throw their passports and their identity cards away as they're coming over the channel. Consequently, we're allowing hundreds of thousands of, mainly about 95% of them are young men aged 18 to 35, and we don't know who the hell they are, we don't know what their backgrounds are, we don't know whether they are sleeper terrorist agents who've been instructed access the UK, remain dormant for a number of years until we activate you. This is basically what is flooding into our country. And then we had the situation recently, just last week, where 3 young innocent girls were stabbed to death in a brutal manner in Southport, and the government and the media refused to identify that person initially. Many people erroneously made the assumption it was one of these asylum seekers or a Muslim, which was incorrect. But the moment all of us heard BBC announcing, I quote, a 17-year-old man has stabbed to death 3 girls, you knew instantly this person was not of this country. It turned out to be wrong, the assumption, in its complete form, but it was basically correct, because it turned out in the end that the 17-year-old offender who committed this hideous crime was born in Cardiff 17 years ago, his parents being at the time Rwandan refugees, asylum seekers who were allowed to come to this country and settle. How they ended up moving from Cardiff to a small village in Lancashire just outside Southport, I'll never know. But that's what actually happened. The point I'm making is, I don't think this young 70-year-old man was British, because his culture is fundamentally different to those of a white indigenous nature. It's very rarely you get a white chap, a white Brit, going around stabbing 3 young girls. It does happen. The point being, we've got enough of our own problems to look after without bringing in hundreds of thousands of asylum seekers who turn out not to be asylum seekers. They're here for purely economic gains, as evidenced by the Albanians. What are they doing here? There's no war in Albania, there's nothing to run away from, yet the Albanians are now basically running inner city crime with drugs and prostitution. That's the thanks we get. Anyway, I digress a little bit there, but the point I'm making is, we've got a 4.3 billion pound budget for these asylum seekers, and anybody with any modicum of common sense, specifically Rachel Reeves, would have looked at the various budgets and decided, well, it's 4.3 billion pounds for the asylum seekers, so rather than me deny access to the winter fuel payments for all our pensioners who've done their bit for this country, I'm going to reduce the asylum seekers budget by 1.5 billion pounds, meaning for that year we'd have 1.5 billion pounds less in terms of numbers of illegal asylum seekers coming over the channel. That is one area she could have looked at, but she didn't. Let's look at another area here. It's cost the British taxpayers the increased salaries for GPs. They got a 22% pay rise, by the way. Well, pensioners who've done their bit have had their winter fuel allowances taken away. GPs have got a 22% pay rise. Doctors, nurses, other health workers, teachers, etc., they've all got substantial pay rises. Net effect being, it's costing the government, or us taxpayers with our taxes, that little lot is going to cost £9 billion. Again, that's an area we could have probably taken £1.5 billion from if Rachel Reeves didn't want to touch the asylum seekers budget. £9 billion it's going to cost us taxpayers. And then, I'm not sure if this story is correct, but somebody informed me the other day in horror that now the GPs, having got their pay rises, 22%, mainly the young doctors, they're actually going to start reducing their appointments list by up to 50%. This means the government, Rachel Reeves, did not have the gumption to factor into the negotiations an agreement on increased productivity for those extra wages of 22%. That is not how you negotiate. That is unbelievable what happened on her watch. Another area we could have looked at, don't forget that £1.5 billion for funding the winter fuel payments for all pensioners. Rachel Reeves could have looked at the UK foreign aid budget, which for 2024-25 is £8.31 billion. She could have taken £1.5 billion from there. To summarise that little bit of number crunching there, it looks as though the Labour Party are deliberately targeting the lower and those approaching lower middle class status, who they seem to hate, and they're targeting them with a vengeance. Particularly anybody with a little bit of money that they've saved through their own endeavours and hard work. It doesn't finish there. Just look at the catalogue of disasters we've wasted money over the years. This is just a quick 5-minute check on Google. Look at this. Since the 1970s, the government's IT-related failure of IT projects has been £40 billion. A current project with the government, IT project, has failed, valued up to £9.3 billion. Cost of it was a new computerised system for the magistrates' courts. That trebled from an original budget of £146 million to £447 million, and it doesn't work, and it won't ever work. Another one. Look at this. Payments for ageing single payment scheme, £350 million. That's for rural payments. Heaven knows what the hell that's for. Rural payments. Single payment scheme was £350 million, being 4 times the original budget of £75.8 million. Here's another one. I've referred to this already, but here's the details. A £9.3 billion communications system for police, ambulance and fire services network was running at £3.1 billion over budget. That was 49% over its original budget, and we're now told that IT system is failed and will never work as originally intended. And then just one last point here. This is the killer. The UK government is paying the Bank of England £40 billion annually, and that is purely interest to the Bank of England for having allowed the Bank of England to print off billions of pounds worth of money for quantitative easing reserves. Here's the killer. The European Central Bank did this. They printed off millions, billions of euros for quantitative easing, and they do not pay the European Central Bank a penny in interest for having printed off that money. That puts things into context. To summarise, the nation generally, but particularly as pensioners, we are being taken to the cleaners. And what needs to happen now is we need somebody to emerge, charismatic person, to unite the pensioners. So out of about 10 million pensioners, we've got about 1.5 million pensioners who are very well off with their gold-plated pensions. The rest, that is not the case. We need somebody to emerge to unite those other 8.5 million pensioners as a one mass voting bloc. And those pensioners, that block of 8.59 million, will have the capacity, once united, to determine the next election, who becomes the next government. It needs pensioners uniting, and it can be done. So I'll leave you with that thought today, because this is just a quick podcast. So thanks for listening.